So just giving you an introduction into some of the tools and resources. And we're going to talk more about that, this afternoon as we wind up the curriculum, as it all sort of builds on itself for one experience. We talked about that, the catalyst last night of what brought us all here and our understanding of the disease concept. And then we started to understand what is a family system, what are we made up of, what are we strapped and linked together by, and then what happens when that trauma trigger and that disease sort of explodes in our family. What are the PTSD symptoms, the ripple effect that we have with the unhealthy caretaking lecture and the PTSD symptoms that we all experience. And so that was the morning conversation. And so we're going to go a little bit deeper into what exactly happens. We're going to peel back a little bit more the family, what exactly happens when that trauma hits the family and those unhealthy caretaking PTSD symptoms develop. And when it happens like this disease does, it goes on for a long period of time. It kind of, creates some patterns of behavior that we're going to start to really peel back. And then after that, this afternoon, we're going to talk, the last final piece of what we do is a little bit more action oriented, is to leave you with, sort of a conversation about what now, now that we have, this very valuable information and this awareness, how do we apply it? What do we take from here? What are some applicable tools? How do we really make it tangible, in our lives? And so this afternoon will go by very quickly. And also I tell I tell families, by this time, even halfway through the day, oftentimes family members and loved ones that are attending are also exhausted. And one of the things that I really try to reflect is also an anecdote that this may give you empathy and understanding for what clients go through every day. And especially when we had this workshop that was 2.5 days or 5 days long, you can imagine, if we came back Sunday, at this time and, your eyes are rolling back in your head, even like the end of the day, you guys will feel emotionally exhausted. And I'll say, hopefully family members, it'll give you some empathy of what the clients go through. A lot of times when I've intervened on clients and send them to treatment centers, very understandably, the family doesn't understand what they go through and they think they're off at some spa, just going to the gym, laying by the pool. But this is tough work. This is tough emotional work, exhausting work, vulnerable work. It's uncomfortable. It's exhausting. It's not a vacation. It's not a spa. And if you have a loved one that went to a residential center, the day starts a lot earlier. Day starts at 6 a.m. and goes until 9 p.m. And so if you're tired now at 1:30 because of the emotional work, they're not getting a break. And so it really provides some empathy for what they go through. And that's another goal of this workshop, is that to provide that empathy for each other, which is, like I said, we're going to be talking about that empathy and perspective shift. Let me ask you guys, what was some of the general experiences, from the small group? What did you guys learn? How many of you guys that was your first experience in a small group like that? Who and what were some of what you experienced, you're not alone? And how helpful did you find that? Extremely helpful. Yep, the me too. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. What else did you guys experience? What did you guys take from there?
The different perspectives, our patient.
Different perspectives. They help being transposed in a group with patients, just not your own. That's intentional. Yep. I used to when I go to speak to schools, a lot of times I require parents to be at the school when I speak. When schools ask me to come speak, they say, we come talk to students. I said, only if the parents are there. And so I'll transpose the parents and families all the time when we divide up in small groups. Because just like we said, family members, emotional intensity skews objectivity. You can hear messages just differently, from the other source. And so, thank you for sharing. What else did you guys sort of experience or notice? And yeah, is that uh, is it perspective what they're going through, what their experiences are, and also I hear that as a family member wanting to be closer to their loved one. That's really what that's about, and so that's wanting to be a part of, and that's also really important as we continue to talk about family recovery. Healthy boundaries, and when we say put down the microscope and pick up the mirror, that doesn't mean that, like I said, that you completely don't have any involvement in their life. It doesn't mean that, you don't, it's not that it's still a very healthy thing to want to know what's going on. There's a complete difference in wanting to know and asking the question and feeling like you need to know to regulate your emotions. Those are two different things. And so there's a difference there, that one is a trauma response and that out of balance dopamine where you need to know, where that external component actually helps you feel better about yourself. That's an unhealthy relationship, as opposed to, the healthy relationship of wanting to be evolved, wanting to be connected. And there's a difference there. It's that out of balance of how much what you put on that, the value you put on those external things. So just want to make clear that family recovery is still about being involved and connected, with your loved one. The part about family recovery is the unhealthy part of it is when that controls and dictates your own emotions and lives, is when that's so unhealthy. Okay. Well, getting in to the rest of the material, like I said, the rest of the time, really want to encourage any questions and comments as we go through the rest of this material. And, as this disease has, progressed in y'all's lives and y'all's family lives, I can imagine that looking back as you guys are doing the discovery of learning about this disease, probably beginning to identify, look back that the elements of this disease probably started to present themselves a lot earlier than you first recognized. Because I remember that when this disease first started to present in my life and my family's life, I didn't really know what was going on. I remember taking a bottle of Percocet to the doctor saying, I don't know what's going on. When I stop taking these, I get sick. And so, as I went through this process, I began to look back and could tell that the disease started to present itself much earlier than, certainly earlier than my family knew of, because I, hid it so well for so long. But as this disease has, progressed, and as it's sort of that chronic stress and those patterns have sort of ingrained themselves, there are behaviors that we see family members that pick up, that the more consistently, unique family members, handle stress in their own independent ways. And the longer that chronic stress and chronic trauma has happened, then these patterns of behavior come what we call family roles. And I know there's been old conversations in family programs about traditional family roles, but that is what happens when you have, such chronic stress and trauma that infiltrates a family system. And it oftentimes, we talked about this before, we have this up there to relatives suffer from mental illness, and it's like, no, they all seem to enjoy it. And that goes back to what we talked about, the safety, the illusion of safety and comfort that we feel in the chaos. That the chaos and the unhealthy system, we feel or think we feel so much more comfortable in. And it's almost like we enjoy the chaos. And to some truth, we do get sort of addicted to the drama and addicted to the adrenaline. One of the things about family recovery and just recovery and stabilization in general that I had to go through, and most of the time most clients go through is like, recovery is boring. It's like, no, life, this is just normal life. Most people don't live at the extremes that we were living in our active disease, at polar extremes, running and gunning. And by the time I got to the worst of my disease, I was doing a lot of illegal things and dealing drugs and doing this and this and that, and in and out of hospitals. Every day was chaotic. Every day was drama. And so you get addicted to that drama. That's not quote unquote normal. Normal life is very boring and very ordinary. I tell people, like, it's inactive and untreated disease process. If it's like a 10-story building, the families and clients usually either live at floors 0 to 1 or 9 to 10. That's where we live, those polar extremes. And so when you get into this recovery process, things slow down. We ask you to get patient. And those are things that we're not very good at. So, well, what do we want to do something? We want to be a part of. It's like, I hear as a family member, you want to be involved, want to be a part of the solution. And what I need you to do right now is actually do nothing. That's hard to do. That sort of acceptance of how long this takes, that this is not going to be an instant gratification, that no matter how passionate or motivated you are, you certainly can do your part in being the change agent. And there's only but so much you can do to speed up this process. And so a huge part of the step toward change is not only, talking about gaining the awareness, but also the acceptance. This is about awareness, then acceptance, and then application. And the acceptance of really how long this takes in the process. We didn't get like this. Generations didn't get like this. Generational patterns of generations of families and decades of behavior. That doesn't change in 30, 60, 90 days. And so these family roles that we're going to talk about and identify, they've been developed over time, whether it's the generational patterns that we learned in our own family of origin that have repeated themselves for decades, or if it's even, family roles that have been instilled under the pressure cooker of trauma. This didn't happen overnight, and it doesn't identify itself, heal and then restructure into healthier roles in 30, 60, 90 days either. And so the idea that the family I call it sort of the family dance. That's really what the disease process looks like in a family. The rules and roles that we establish, like I said, it's there to predict people's behavior, how they're going to respond. And so it's like the family's on a stage. It's almost like this just constant chaos of dancing around the disease and trying to do what we can to maintain status quo, trying to do what we can to maintain, when you shake that baby's mobile, just whatever we can do to not rock the boat. And it's like we're on a stage, and each member of the family has a role. Like we talked about, everyone in the family is impacted one way or the other. Whether you realize it or not, you are impacted, and everybody is a part of this play. And everybody actually has these roles, even when the identified patient and person of concern is not there. The only issue is that when the trauma trigger, or when that identified patient is there, it is far more intensified. You guys absolutely will be able to identify these roles that we're going to review are absolutely present in the standard family that doesn't have ongoing mental health or substance use, active and ongoing. These roles are standard in every family. The only part of what comes much more obvious is when you have active disease and you have this pressure cooker, they become much more pronounced, and they show themselves at more intense levels. And you're also going to find family members and loved ones very much unintentionally and unknowingly take on these roles. These are roles that develop because there are patterns, coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, communication patterns that we've already established, that we've developed most of the time from a young age. And so all of these things coming together, and all of a sudden, day in and day out of the chronic stress, and these patterns have formed, and we don't even realize that we've taken up the mantle of the role that we have.
And I think the addition that I'd add to the roles before we start like doing the actual exercises of identifying our roles is each role serves a purpose. It's got positives and negatives. There's not like one role that's like, that's the one, he's the problem. That's not it. Each role has positives and negatives. We get into that similarly, like we get into treading water. It's a survival mechanism. In my house, there's someone who cooks the food, and there's someone who shops for the food. There's someone who pays the bills, and there's someone who makes the money. There's someone who feeds the kid, and there's one that bathes the kid. We all have our jobs in the house, and we kind of just unknowingly over time took that job. I always say my job is the laundry. One of my roles is I also am the laundress at my house. And I say, like, if I ever came home to my clothes hanging in my closet nice and neat for me and like put away in my drawers, I would have a heart attack. I would think someone broke into my house just to do the laundry. But the rest of my family, that's their daily life. They come home to clean clothes, like a fairy came in there and delivered them clean clothes because they don't know the role. That's their expectation of what keeps the status quo. So if something were to change, it would be a disruption in their life. Well, what am I going to do? How will I wear the shirt that I wore last week? I need it again this week. That would literally be their conversation. So our roles serve a purpose. It's helpful in ways that we don't realize. It also keeps things rolling. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the thing that we want to do going forward, though. So when you hear these roles, it's easy to identify like some that seem better than others. And it's human nature to say, I want to play the good role. But remember, all of them have positives and negatives.
And one of the things that, like I said, we'll talk about is these roles are present in the standard of family. And
Yeah.
when you're under intense pressure and they become more pronounced, you also, when they become people's identity, that becomes far more unhealthy. These, as Brandy said, these roles serve a purpose of when it's just basic roles of filling what is healthy and what is unhealthy. Not necessarily better than the other, they're just different. And when these roles go into becoming somebody's identity, that's when they get prominently unhealthy, is when they go from roles to identities. It's a difference in its role you're filling to maintain status quo, just like Brandy's talk about. And then the difference is when it goes so far that you get your value out of fulfilling that role, is when you really have to take another look at it. And so in the first and obvious role is the identified patient, the person of concern. This is the elephant in the room. This is the one that family and loved ones often tiptoe around, unsure of what to expect. I know in the initial stages of the disease, when it was obvious I had the disease and really not knowing what to do or how to communicate about it, just the anticipation of what to do on weekends, how to go on vacations, being able to go out of town, how it even controls your family's schedule and your family's operations, because you don't know what to expect. You don't know how ward's going to show up, or you don't know what's going to happen, or you're going to even go on vacation, or can we do this, or can we do that, because there's no telling how ward's going to show up. That just anticipation is something that has major influence over everybody's just general existence. Family members absolutely begin to gauge the mood and assess the environment before making plans. This is what we talked about. You can teach your brain to live in a chronically threatened environment because you got your constant radar going. Your constant radar, you can judge the temperature of the room with the millimeter drop in the cheek, a smell in the room. You can just judge it. That's how many of you guys are also, this is also a quality, if you've ever heard the term adult children of alcoholics, that you grew up with parents that maybe struggle with this disease. This is also a quality that you guys have of an ACOA, is what it's called, adult children of alcoholic. You grow up with massive emotional IQ where you can judge and scan the environment and judge the temperature of the room.
People who are highly intuitive, this is a symptom of you needed that skill to survive. You needed intuition to be able to sense what's going around, to see how to create safety for you and for those that you love. So
it is absolutely a survival skill. It is that's what, in Brandy reiterating it, these absolutely served a purpose to maintain and keep the family alive and above water. That's exactly right. And obviously the identified patient in their and their disease patterns. It's avoidance behavior, the substances of abuse, the avoiding connections and avoiding feeling. Listen, pain medicine works. It takes the pain away. It's no longer functional in my life, but it takes the pain away. Alcohol takes the pain away. That's what it does. It anesthetizes sort of emotions. And that's the way that we escape. That's the way that we medicate. That's the way that we avoid. The identified patient sort of avoids the connections and the feelings. And most importantly, that although the identified patient is often labeled as the problem, they are not the only one that's struggling with substances or issues. Like I said, a minimum, even conservatively, as an interventionist, 2 out of 5 cases, I'm in a 90-day to 6-month span, I'm putting 2 out of 5 family members in some form of mental health or substance abuse treatment. And so, this is the sort of identified patient that we're all familiar with, that sort of dictates sort of the family that we're trauma bonded onto, that we're hyper focused onto, that is our trauma trigger. And then we have the other role, the family hero. This is the perfectionist who needs to make good on everything and everyone. This is the person who refuses to acknowledge the problems exist and pretends that they do not exist. Let me ask you, and this is, being a perfectionist is completely different than somebody who just doesn't accept average or doesn't accept the status quo, who's driven, who's ambitious, who doesn't take no for an answer, and who just champions causes. That is completely different than a perfectionist and a family hero. What do you think the difference is? I'm sorry? So talk more about that. So that what she what she said for the people attending virtual, it's unattainable. It's actually inhumane. What's the one thing, if you are a perfectionist, if you judge your value out of being perfect, what's the one thing that's guaranteed? Failure. So despite whatever accomplishments you achieve, no matter how many trophies or how many valedictorians or how many degrees or how many job promotions, what's the one thing you will always feel?
Failure,
Failure,
disappointment.
disappointment. Not enough. There's a difference. This is completely different than somebody who's just driven to accomplish. The perfectionist, the family.
I like to talk about perfectionism as a delusion, and I am a recovery perfectionist, so I say this with kindness towards myself. But it is a delusional process that your brain thinks, if I just do everything perfect, everyone else will survive and everything will be okay. We'll all be all right. Just let me take your burden. Are you slacking? I'll take it. Are you slacking? I'll take it. And figure out a way to do everything perfectly. And that's really where the perfectionist kind of comes from. And someone will come up to them, just as someone with an like if someone's suffering with an eating disorder, a therapist might come up to them, or someone might come up to them and say, "Oh, I know what you should do. Eat." And they're like, "Oh, right. Why didn't I think of that?" Perfectionism is also a delusion. It's non-rational. So I heard someone say I think it was you said, it's unattainable. And my sick brain said, maybe for you.
And that's actually what all the family heroes say.
Yeah,
Maybe for everybody else, not me.
Yeah, maybe me, So that's just where your delusion comes in, is that somehow I'm better than you and somehow I'm more capable than you, and I'm going to do it on my own. And I'm going to prove to you that I can make it happen. I didn't say it's smart. Delusional. I've said that, right? Okay. I saw the judgment. I'm just making sure.
One thing as we go through these too, please be mindful, because it's what first happens is you start picking these behaviors out in everybody else in your family.
Mhm.
And so how about let's rein that in what you,
We
I
can
can
just
see
diagnose
your
more.
body
Let's
language.
just-
Let's jam this up. And so
Yeah.
that's what part of these you guys identify with, and we're not here to take everybody else's inventory, but what part of these do you play a role in? Or if you have young children and you're a parent, it's like, what, even if your young children are starting to show these as a parent, what do you need to do to help them, not go down some of these unhealthy roads? But this family hero, it has this exterior display of cheer, almost like that positivity that just doesn't recognize what's really going on. But deep down, they're plagued by feelings of that guilt, shame, fear, insecurity, not being enough. Deep down, that's how they really feel. Once again, driven by this unobtainable, except for Brandy, this unobtainable, perfectionism. Like nothing is ever enough. Nothing is ever enough for this, family hero. And there's the mascot. This is the comedian in the family, the entertainer in the family, uses silliness and off-color humor, sarcasm as defense mechanisms to bring the levity up in the room. I know you guys experienced it in the small group just then. There's somebody who was uncomfortable with the vulnerability in the room and they had to crack a joke to bring it up. That's an unhealthy defense mechanism. And so that we do that. My dad does that quite a bit. I was one of the roles I took on was also the family comedian. But I remember I was in as a patient in Betty Ford for the last time, at least as of right now. And we were in the family workshop and we had need and need. We would be in our own small group. And when you're there 5 days, you would actually spend need and need with your family member when in the group. And he was supposed to tell us how he felt watching me go through the disease process. And he couldn't do it without telling some sort of joke, without making some sort of sarcastic joke. And so finally the therapist was like, Butch, why do you feel like you have to do that? Just tell them how you feel. And so that sarcasm, that humor can be used to alleviate the room. And that's all about the person who's uncomfortable with the vulnerability in the room. Also, this is the person who feels responsible for the entertainment of the family, everybody else's happiness. That entertainer, that they're responsible for everybody's happiness. That was me, even though I was the sick one. I remember it like it was yesterday because it was Friday the 13th, August 1999, at the Mayo Clinic. And I don't know if anybody's lucky enough to spend time at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, but there's an old hotel called the Kaler Hotel right outside of the Mayo Clinic. And this was in the early 2000s, late 99. And I remember the day that I was diagnosed, we had adjoining rooms, my parents and I, because I was 18. I wasn't going to stay in the hotel room with my parents. And the walls were very thin. And at midnight, I could hear what my parents were saying to each other and hear them cry and hold each other. And I remember saying, I'll never let them see me cry again. And so I was the one that always had the smile on my face, despite having the trach and the oxygen tank. And everybody would say, God, Ward, you're dealing with this so well. You got if those of you guys have seen Happy Gilmore, the Shooter McGavin, type of look, I could put on that mask. And everybody say, you're doing so well. Inside, I was dying. Inside, I was angry at the life that I thought God stole from me. But I was like, I'll never let my family see me cry. I was the athlete. I was my dad's pride and joy. I was like the family trophy. And here I was sick, but I'm not going to let them see me cry. But inside, I'm dying because that's what really is underneath that distracts from shame, embarrassment, anger, feelings of inadequacy, that guilt. Because they've got this external display of cheer and this entertainment responsible for your family's entertainment and happiness, especially in such the middle of an intense traumatic situation. It's a lot of responsibility. And so
and it's a robbing of the ability to be authentic. So you really, if you're the clown, someone's got to play that role. So you really don't have the ability when you don't feel funny to be truthful. And I watch a lot of comedy. Anybody like comedy shows, like comedians? I love comedians.
Yep.
And I watch them and then I study them because I can't help it. And so like the Robin Williams of the world or, that you look at and they're suffering, but they can't tell you that they're suffering because this is their role, and so you watch and kind of see.
And much like the family hero and much like the mascot, you're starting to see a pattern that there's an enormous incongruence between the mask that we wear but what's really going on. And if you want to talk about this general recovery process and the work we have to do within, that's really the relationship we have to become congruent with. When we say it's an internal job, that incongruence between all the masks that we wear, that role, and how we're truly feeling, and what this common denominator is between all the external masks and roles may be different, But what do you notice will be the common denominator between all of these? The caretaker, often called the chief enabler, and the very accurate stereotype, this could be mom, although it's not all the case, but it's most of the time the case. And so this is the person that tries to keep everybody happy, to meet everyone else's needs. Often is the one that makes the excuses and protects the identified patient at all costs. Lots of excuses and blame on the others. Often blames others, especially the professionals, because that's when the identified patient says, Blanchard isn't doing this, Brandy isn't doing that. They don't have my organic food, and the chief neighbor swoops in to make them comfortable. And often, either doctor shops or therapist shops to get the therapist to give them permission to do whatever they want to do. And so this is the one that oftentimes has the hardest time with the professional boundaries, because they're the one that's often closest to the trauma bond. They're the one whose disease is often closest to the trauma bond. They protect the identified patient and others, the general family, but certainly identified patient, from consequences. Like I said, and then trying to keep everybody else's happy. What's the problem with trying to meet everybody else's needs? Who's the one person that you neglect? Yourself.
Don't meet
And
your
the one
own.
person, it's actually it's actually a form of internal narcissism, because you're actually meeting everybody else's needs for yourself.
Mhm.
It's actually a form of internal narcissism. It's actually because it's really about you. You're not doing it to be selfish. You're really doing it to feel better about you, because you feel like you've got that to do. This is completely different than being nurturing. Being nurturing and doing something else. Like the world needs nurturing, compassionate people. This is completely different. This is getting your value out of meeting other people's needs when you need to be that provider. That is different than being a healthy nurturer. Than getting this, much like the difference between somebody who's ambitious and driven and a perfectionist. Like, this is different. And puts on this air of problem-free, the white picket fence. This person has significant blind spots around the identified patient, because they've got to keep this mask on. Consequence, nothing's going on here. And so this is the one that, my mother struggled with this. And I can't tell you that, like, for instance, I used to always crash and burn around Thanksgiving. So I was in treatment so many times, I used to think Thanksgiving dinner comes on a cafeteria tray.
Mhm.
And there was this one time I was at Thanksgiving, and here I survived this deadly medical illness. And I was so stoned at the dinner table that I aspirated a chicken bone, and the chicken bone punctured a hole in my lung. And there was air in my skin like bubble tape. And on the Outer Banks, where there's not a hospital within an hour and a half or 2 hours, the Nighthawk helicopter from Norfolk lands in my driveway like Black Hawk Down. Wop, 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 wop. Ambulance come, and my mom was like, "Don't let the neighbors know. There's something wrong with Ward." As Black Hawk Down is pulling me out of the, and 7 ambulances show up to try to figure out. Say, "Shh, don't let anybody know something's going on with Ward." It's like, I think they know. But it just showed she was really about trying to protect it. And it wasn't a week before that I ran into a cop car with him in it, drove away, and the SWAT team brought me home. And she's still trying to protect, still trying to say there's nothing wrong with Ward. And that chief enabler, that chief nurture. I've actually had one of these parents tell me, and just when we talk about you drawing the line, say, "Well, my son didn't hold the knife to my throat; he held it to my stomach." And I was like, "You hear you trying to protect them, and you guys are shaking your head, but to some degree, you guys are all doing the same thing. To some degree, it's that we draw the line, don't realize how far off normal that we've gotten. They're fixing and focusing on others. Just it feels that need to be needed. Medicating feelings of inadequacy, helplessness, shame. Also feeling that they're never enough. And also, when you have to meet everybody else's needs, the one thing you don't do is you don't communicate your own, but you do get resentful that they don't just do it for you, that they don't just read your mind. And so that's what happens is you do everything for everybody else. Don't ask for your own needs, but you get resentful as hell that they don't just know to do it back for you. Like, we're supposed to read your mind. And there's this cycle that happens, this resentment that happens. So you don't communicate your own, but you don't even understand that you have the value to communicate your own needs. And so there's this cycle that happens and that perpetuates this resentment and anger, but you've got this incongruence because deep down you're resentful, you're angry, you're feeling like not enough. And you're starting to recognize this pattern that happens between all these roles, the difference between the external mask and what's really going on inside, the roles that we fill, the identities that we take on. Like I said, this is absolutely different than the nurturing, healthy process that is, there's very compassionate and very needed to have nurturing people in a family. And does anybody relate to any of that? Nobody in here, huh? And then there's the lost child. This is, one that's often called the quiet one. This is one that doesn't like to make waves. This is one that I often hear parents say, oh, they don't need much. They can take care of themselves. They're mature. They don't, this one just kind of avoids any sort of confrontation, any sort of ways, whether it's like, hey, mom and dad are dealing with so much with Ward. Tom's sort of the family hero. I'm just going to sit back and take care of myself, not going to make any waves because everybody's dealing so much. What do you think that's communicating? Just say it louder. They're not important.
Yeah.
Yep. If and this happens regularly. I can't tell you how many times we're doing interventions and pre-interventions meetings, and we're, meeting with a family for weeks, even months. And then the night before the pre-intervention, they're like, oh, can Cindy Lou come? And I'm like, who is Cindy Lou? We've been meeting for 2 months. And it's like, oh, it's her sister, their best friend. It's like, I haven't even heard about her for 2 months. Happens all the time. It's like, oh, they're the good one. They're the quiet one. They don't need much. And just they're just kind of neglected. It's also why we talked earlier about siblings can often be the last to join the process because, they can often be the angry one because they've got the family love, but not the blinding parental love. And the hyper focus on the identified patient. Not only do they get resentful over the impact on their parents and their family, but what it takes away from their own autonomous relationship. And so, but they can't voice their needs because they're the quiet one. They don't want to make waves. And they haven't been given the space or the acknowledgement or the time or the attention to empower that. And so, they give it up, avoids any sort of disturbance, just hides within the family chaos, voices sort of no needs, no stress, and just sort of quietly disappears. Children should be seen and not heard. This is something that happens all the time in families.
I think the downside too of the lost child is, just as a therapist, I can think of so many patients that have come in and sat on my sofa and they've described kind of their life and they went as the good child in the house. They kind of just went with the message of it's not important. And really what that teaches is like, you're not worth it. You're not worth my time, my energy. It all has to go to this person. And regardless of whether or not that person is, the patient is really sick, obviously, the message to the lost child is the same. Even though mom and dad might have taken time, or brother or sister might have taken time to say, oh, you matter, a really great job on that test today, or a really good job on that soccer game. Really, the overarching behavior says otherwise. So the message like fine tunes within themselves that you're unimportant and you don't matter. And then what ends up happening is that carries on into their relationships in the future. They end up in unhealthy relationships where they kind of go with their needs unmet. Is there an intervention?
We're getting ready to do an exercise.
Yeah.
And then there's the scapegoat. This is the troublemaker. This is the one who acts out in order to divert attention away from the real problem. Frequently the recipient of the family blame. Oftentimes it's easier to point toward a child that gets brought home in handcuffs or something like that than what's really going on with the parents. Is the one that you can point toward because their outward behavior, which is really a cry for help, is much easier to blame. Maybe seen as the reason for the family struggles. They're acting out on the collective buildup of the stress and the anxiety. This happened to one of my brothers, the middle brother. Like I said, you've heard me say that, we grow up blessed with resources, and then, one time out of town, he's stuck between a valedictorian and my older brother, and then me as athlete of the year, Ham and also valedictorian. My middle brother's stuck in between. My parents go out of town for a weekend, and my Meemaw, the matriarch, is taking care of us, and he gets arrested for stealing hamburger meat at the SNR. You got 2 refrigerators full of meat. You think he needed that? Or do you think he's just crying out for help? Is something going on here to pay attention to? We've talked about even as adults that we weren't even taught how to communicate our own feelings. And so before we expect to say, hey, well, these people should just communicate their needs. It's like even as adults, we don't even know how to communicate our feelings. How do we expect a 17-year-old who's in the middle of this chaos to know what to communicate and how to communicate it? And so this is just how they act out. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to this individual also where they said, Ward, when my dad was beating me, it was the only time he paid attention to me. And so I'd rather him beat me than not pay attention to me at all. And so it's the way that they cried out to get help. It's the way they communicated that something was going on here. And sort of deep down, there underneath all that is that shame, that guilt, not being enough. And you're starting to see that frequent pattern. And that's a human being pattern, guys, no matter where you're from or what demographic. I can tell you, I've worked in Southern California for, in the world of what the treatment centers would call notable or celebrity clients, Fortune 500 clients, and people that you see in movies and in magazines work with, and they suffered from the same inadequacies and insecurities, not being enough, not meeting expectations, not feeling like they ever amounted to their parents' expectations. Multi-million-dollar Oscar winners and owners and CEO of Fortune 500 companies, family heroes, not feeling like they've gotten enough to meet their parents' expectations. These are all understandable human being feelings, but what do you notice is common amongst all of them?
Not being enough.
Not being enough. What's underneath it all?
Mhm.
Fear,
Fear,
sadness,
shame,
Mhm.
guilt. No matter what the external mask is, what are all these roles driven by? What are all these roles driven by? Speak up.
Insecurities. What he said.
Absolutely. Some form of soul wound of insecurity, shame, fear, guilt. That's underneath it all. Underneath that mask that we wear is some form of a medicator. Underneath it all is that feeling of not being enough, toxic shame, guilt. And we would never know that by their external display. Let me ask you, which one of these do you think is the most likelihood to be the identified patient? Why do you say that? Or somebody said scapegoat? Can you just speak up?
They're the ones you.
Which one? The
The
scapegoat?
is what he said. Yeah.
Okay, that's they said the scapegoat. What else? What do you guys think? Okay, why is that?
something did done to me, identified as self.
So that's right. It's all of them. There's no specific ones. The more likely it's all of them, because they're all struggling with the same exact thing, just gross incongruence, and using something to treat how they're truly feeling inside. They're all struggling with inadequacy, toxic shame, fear, guilt, and they don't know how to get it out. They don't know how to cope. They don't know how to communicate it. And there's no mechanism for them to do that. And so they're all the likelihood to turn into identified patient. And so what about as somebody goes along, how many roles do you think they can take on? How many of you guys identify with one or multiple of these?
Yeah, and in different settings too.
What is that?
For me, it's like the scapegoat. It's the one that always causes trouble, the problem child.
Yep, scapegoat.
That and good child. Like you just sit in the corner and
Mhm.
stay back. Like as I was growing up, I was
Mhm.
that, but as
Mhm.
I got older, I became a scapegoat. I was always the leader of the party. And it's me.
Mhm.
There's no question that roles change and adapt, that you take on multiple roles. There were times, and as people grow and things happen to family, whether it's traumas or people get sick or people pass away or events happen, people adjust, families adjust, they grow. I was the mascot and sort of somewhat of the family hero for a little while, and I turned into the identified patient and a little bit of the scapegoat, and brothers sort of switched and changed. And as that we say, as a family system changes and adjusts with ages, with life, with experiences, so do the roles. They change too. So we can take on multiple roles. We can take on and adjust, and all of them have the likelihood to turn into, the identified patient. And the part about doing this is also beginning to gain awareness, especially if you have, children and minors that you can see taking on these characteristics. It is not up to them to be assertive and begin to communicate their way out of this. It is up to the parents to begin to set the tone and create the space to help them out of it. Because minors, lost children and scapegoats and teenagers, like I said, as adults, we don't even know how to communicate. And we have access to tools and professionals. We cannot expect minors and adolescents to work their way out of this by themselves without help. And so it requires sort of adults to model that behavior, to create the system and the space that you can have these conversations. And that's what this process is about, is helping to identify these so we can create that change. And one of the things as we enter the second part of this lecture, we're going to do a different exercise to give you guys some exposure into some different forms of professional resources. Because as we've talked about, when somebody enters in treatment and they don't have a frontal cortex, need talk therapy is not the most effective treatment. Like, we know that early treatment in that first 90 days to 6 months is not psychotherapy based. There's all different forms of holistic treatment, whether it's educational therapy, group therapy, individual therapy is a part of it. Experiential therapy is a big part of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that experiential therapy, because at the root of that is experience, at the root of that term, experiential therapy. And if you are to think about how we grow and how we learn in this world, is through experiences. As an infant, it's not because we're sitting there as 6 months old having a conversation back and forth with our caregiver that we learn. We learn through experiences. That's how we learn. We learn through behavior. We learn through application. And so experiential therapy is sort of not death by PowerPoint, but sort of experiencing the material actually accesses a different part of somebody's brain. And so what we're about to do right now is what we call a family sculpt. And no matter how many times I do this, there's always somebody in the audience that says, "Oh, that son of a gun put my family up there," and is telling everybody. I promise you, there's nobody's family that I have in mind when I'm doing this. And so we're going to give you guys a visual of what these family roles, truly look like. And I'm going to ask Josh to be my resident alcoholic. You're always such a wonderful alcoholic. And so stand on that stool for me and hold this up nice and high. And so we're going to sculpt this family system with a father and a husband that is struggling with substance use disorder. And Miss Judy, I'd have you have this role. I would have you have this role. And so if we were to originally think of how we would place a healthy partnership, healthy coupleship, healthy marriage, we would normally place them side by side. And that's not this marriage, is because when there's active and untreated disease process, there's no coupleship, there's no intimacy, there's no connection there, because this rules the roost. And Judy, because she loves her partner and doesn't have the professional guidance or the healthcare system to help, is is actually not setting the proper boundaries and doesn't know what to do and is not choosing to address it. And
Nah.
she's the one that calls the Blanchard Institute and says, Josh can't come into work today. He's sick. And the ones that makes the excuses out there in society, but really she's helped holding that alcohol up. And so Judy will take on that role. And who's going to be the family hero? And we are going to have Chad come over here and be the family hero. You can wear that for me. You're going to be the king of the day. You're the savior. Hold that, Thor. You can have Mjolnir, and you took on the Infinity Gauntlet, and you also hold that. And so, this is the family hero that is trying to do everything to feel good and to take the attention off away from this individual. And what also tends to happen is the family hero helps mom, take on some of the life skills of the day, help, clean the house, you go hold that, some of the partnerships that the husband's supposed to do, the family hero has to step up and do. And so let's see, what do we have? What other wonderful tricks do we have here? And so come right on here and be my mascot. And so she is the family mascot. Give that a toot every once in a while.
I sure will.
And because it's so much easier to pay attention to that toot, and then you turn around and every once in a while you entertain that family. And so the more that it's a lot easier to pay attention to that than this. And so, yep, give it a toot. And also
Maybe less toot.
you help take care of her every once in a while because you're a good brother. And let's see, what else do we have here? We have we've got the scapegoat.
I'm saying they added more liquid lately.
We've got the scapegoat. Come on over here and you can come here. You're getting brought home in handcuffs and put those on because you're cool. And and so this is what's happening, and she gets brought up. Yep. You see, you can, Brandy, you can
getting
play the
there.
police officer and you can bring her home.
Oh, great.
And
Does it
then
match?
you're,
Okay, well, that's at least
and
it's
then
that.
you're helping bailing her out of jail. You
Arrested,
help that.
arrested.
Oh, excuse me.
Where are we taking her?
And so you can be my lost child and you can go on out here. You can be just fine. She's fine. She's fine. She can take care of herself.
Didn't need anything.
She can take care of herself. And so, and what happens here is
Oh, the whole.
you're tooting that and having so much good time that you see what dad does, and every once in a while you may go have a little nip with him. And so
Text on these, just in case.
this is what tends to happen. And let's see, get one more. I think you're not quite accomplished enough. Hold one more. And so that's sort of how you guys enter our office and call us and say, just fix that. And so the interventionist will come in and I'll say, okay, I'll take this, and Josh, I'll intervene and you come this way and
Come with the box.
yeah, come with the bottle. We'll detox you off of it. And he'll spend this time in treatment, and we'll say, you guys need to come to the family stuff. And you'll say, no, we don't need to. And we'll look at it. Professionals will look, and Ryan, come over here. You're going to be Josh's therapist. Evan, we
Oh,
come
that's
over
nice.
here and you're going to be Josh's sponsor, and he's building his team and he's getting healthy, and look at that, and keep tooting away. Give it up. And so let me ask you guys is, when it's time to sort of discharge Josh, do you think that he by himself has the best opportunity to pull all of that this way, or that pull him back into that mess? And so what do you think they're going to hear from us? But no, 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 no. We're not going there. Said you can't pluck a dying plant out of dying soil, heal the plant, and then pluck it right back into toxic soil. And so the process is that we will say, you come this way, come here. And yes, you're going to have to separate from all of this. And also what I can tell you guys is, right back over here. I know, is with this relationship here that's important to identify is because this relationship becomes emotionally enmeshed because he's taken on roles that really should be the partner or the husband. And this is called the parentified child. And oftentimes they like this, all the wise one, the old soul, and like, oh, they're so mature that it's like, no, 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 it's not healthy. And this is also called emotional incest. There's nothing sexual about it, but it's emotional incest because they're often sharing things about their day and stuff like that that should be shared with their partner, that should be shared with a child. It's very unhealthy. And that partnership and that relationship, there's nothing sexual about it, but it's just emotional. That there's, that there's boundaries there that shouldn't have to do. It's called the parentified child. Oftentimes that's filled by the family hero. That happened to my niece, and but she was 7 years old and she could do the 6 years old and could do the dishwasher and do this and do that. And people would say, oh, she's so mature. She's the what? And I said, no, that's not healthy. Like when she's on the phone saying, it's okay, mommy, you can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. People say, oh, that's cute. I said, no, it's not. For a 6-year-old to be that for their mother, it's not. It robs her of her childhood. She should be playing with toys and
Making mistakes.
making mistakes, not being the emotional support and cleaning the house. And so we'll intervene and we'll say, no, this is a family system program. If you want to stay with us, you have to be involved. And so we'll bring her over here and then we'll say that you have to get your sponsor. And so would you mind just standing up for me, just participating? You have to get your support and you have to get you can stand up, right? And you wouldn't mind helping, and you have to get your therapist. And then that's how we can then collectively, don't you think this visual has a better chance of helping out this? And so we'll all come over here collectively together and we'll come over here. Bring your posse, your recovery team here with you. And so we'll come over here and you'll say, I'm sorry, son, I'll take that from you. And you'll say, you don't have to do this, and we'll stop this before this gets out of control. And then we'll stop this and everybody will begin to line to say, thank you, officer. She's done her community service. She's free to go.
Pleasure.
And then we all have that support. And then we share these, and you can step out of the middle because they're usually in the middle in that triangle because of the parental splitting. And that looks a lot more realigned.
Hey, you forgot a kid.
And I always forget the lost child. I always forget that and we bring the lost child.
I'll arrest her too.
Thank you, officer. And so that's a family realignment process. Do you think that's done in 30, 60, 90 days? Do you think that makes a whole lot more sense of, well, it takes 2 years to stabilize that, to do all of that? It takes every bit of 2 years. And there's so much of that you can't speed up just because you want it and they're impatient. That's just going to take time. There's some parts of that that's just going to take time. And so doing the inner work to understand that you've got to have that patience is key, because all of this is family restructuring and family realignment. And it takes a long time. And this is not pure family therapy. This is not done 50 minutes once a week in an MFT's office. They're not taught how to do this. And so it takes a whole lot of professional resources and teams, because you've got 5 or 6 family members that need help. And so 50 minutes once a week or 30 minutes once a month is grossly ineffective at any form of this. It's just like any sort of severe disease. It takes a whole lot of support and sacrifice at the beginning. Thank you guys. You can step down. Appreciate it. There's without question, there's times that so many times this is when, if we had more time, that somebody would say, sit right there and say, but I'm so much more comfortable in that chaos. I'm so much more comfortable in that chaos than I was that first sculpt than I was that second. Because that's what was familiar to us. That was what was consistent. And so that entire process of restructuring, of intervening, of triaging the entire family system, then identifying the unique unhealthy barriers and roles, establishing new ones, and then putting them into play consistently takes every bit of 2 years. That initial family sculpt did not get that way in 30, 60, 90 days. It will not heal in 30, 60, 90 days. And so that's what's called sort of experiential therapy. There was once a time we had more time that, we do more individual ones, but you can see that sort of visual, that recall. There's people, you do that form of therapy, and actually patients and families participate in that, where it's not just my staff. And you can see how that information and that type of therapy will stick. People will have much more memory recall when it comes to that than, death by PowerPoint. And so,
I want to add a little bit to that too.
yep.
Like whenever we do these experiential roles or the role play at games, I think it's important that you realize as the therapist, it's going to take us a lot longer than expected, because you're not coming in knowing the roles. Like we're having to then explain these to you, go over them, and deal with the emotion that comes up. So oftentimes, if I were doing this in my family workshop back in the day, the caretaker or the mom, typically that person's role, she feels bad and she wants nobody to have a role. She wants to take every role onto herself. So she's going to have a lot of shame that's coming from having these roles identified in her children, and that she feels an unnecessary sense of burden over the responsibility of these roles. The person who's struggling with addiction is saying, well, that's not my fault. He was a clown before I picked up the booze, or she was always quiet. That's her own fault. Like she never speaks up. Those kinds of things are happening. So you're having to deal with all these things as they come up. So it's not like, bam, we got this done. And then the other part is it's hard for people to, when you're having your own emotion, to understand what the other person's perspective is. And that's what Ward was talking about earlier, is empathy and perspective shifts. And so when you're the rescuer, you're the hero, it's hard to really understand the scapegoat. And so they'll say, well, I don't get it. It must be nice to be the scapegoat. It must be nice to be the one that can always get in trouble. Like here I am holding up all these balls, even have this giant one right here, and you're over here getting arrested. And so they don't have a lot of empathy or perspective for that person. So what we'll do is some shifts, some paradigm shifts, where it's like, okay, I'd like you to step over here and imagine what it feels like to be this person when this is going on in the house. And they'll say, well, I can't imagine, because I would never do it, obviously, because I'm perfect, And so we'll say, that's fine. And also take a guess, start talking now, and we'll let you know when you get there. And so then they have to step into the discomfort of what it must feel like to be the embarrassment or the shame or the problem and all that kind of stuff. And they have to go into that. That's the way that we can build emotional empathy for someone when they wouldn't be able to necessarily talk it through when you're doing what Ward's calling knee to knee, where you're sitting knee to knee and just doing talk therapy. So we'll use these experiential exercises to kind of get to the issue and build up the insight into the emotionality behind these roles. And then we'll use talk therapy to kind of go through that and to identify. For instance, I have a girl that wants to be, the one that's sassy that I told you about. She wants to be the perfect kid, and just the straight A's and all of it. I don't know where she gets it. And so we're always looking for opportunities to highlight failure for this kid, like, hey, you saw that? You did that thing that was really funny. You fell down in front of everybody, and it was fine. Nothing happened. The world kept going. We're looking for opportunities to highlight her opportunity to move outside that role and be just okay. It's fine. Nothing's going to happen. So anytime she has an opportunity to highlight failure. Now, another one, the younger daughter, we're always looking for opportunity for her to feel leadership or feel some accomplishment. So anything that she does, we're trying to highlight those moments, because she often is times the one who's like in trouble, or she's always got her phone taken away, because she's always the one who makes those decisions. She's like, yeah, there's a right and a wrong. So we're always trying to figure out ways to highlight her opportunity to step outside that role. Now, if I were to diagram all these and talk at length, they probably would have more resistance to it. but going into the family and looking for those opportunities to pick ways that they could step outside of their role, it's good too. If you have a clown, looking for times where they are actually more emotionally connected in a real authentic way, that's a good way to encourage more of that. So looking for that in your family members is a way that you could start shifting some of those roles within your own home now. And it also starts with you saying, like, I'm typically the hero, but I'm really weak right now. I don't feel like I have anything to give, stuff like that.
Does anybody have any questions regarding that family roles, family sculpt, or anything that we just talked about? Okay, Erica, what have we got? So we've got a 5-minute break. The quicker that you get break, the quicker get back in here, the quicker we can get on with the day and finish up. So to have a 5-minute break, the quicker the better. Okay, here we are in the the final stretch. Oh, I need to stay in my box, Erica. I'm sorry. This is my glass box of emotion right here. Okay, Brady will be joining us in a minute. Like I said, a treatment center owner's job is never done. So here we are in the final death by PowerPoint that we have, and then we'll go into a closing process group, and then we'll be done for the day. And that I can't tell you how much I appreciate the that family sculpt and what that does. Experiential therapy, I can't tell you, especially right now at this stage of these 18 months. And if you think about it, guys, as family members and clients, that as your frontal cortex come back online, like that's the part of the brain that psychodynamic knee-to-knee traditional therapy really needs to be properly functioning to be really that effective. And so make sure you hear that we're not saying that individual psychotherapy isn't effective. It's just most effective when somebody's 2 years and beyond. And you certainly include it, and it's impactful, and it's certainly worthwhile. And you can understand hopefully how when you're operating off a limbic system and not much of a frontal cortex, oftentimes experiential therapy can be far more effective. In fact, we know when treating substance use disorders and working with families in the middle of traumatic circumstances, especially like this first year of this process, that including experiential therapy as just a component. That's why we call treatment needs to be holistic, needs to come. You need group therapy, you need educational therapy, you need individual therapy, and also experiential therapy and nutrition and all sorts of things. But guys got to experience a little bit of that, and so now this portion of the conversation is really much more based in sort of action and what to do now. And, you know, leaving here today, that hopefully you guys have been introduced to a tremendous amount of new information, gain some awareness. And our goal is that this will begin to empower change. This is just the stepping point. This is just the first step into an exciting journey in new normal. And really want to talk a little bit about what sort of action items, tangible action items and tools are most important leaving here today, going into tonight and tomorrow and short term and long term. And so now is definitely the time to, ask your questions. I know there's some of you that have asked me some questions throughout the workshop that I've actually said, hey, hold that off or ask that, later in the day. Now's the time, because all of this information, like just being up in your head, is not going to do anything unless you begin to apply it. Application is the key to transformation. I can't stress that enough. And external reform takes internal renewal. And so this starts, from within. So beginning to understand those concepts and how they are in application on a short-term basis is going to be really important, because you are at a fork in the road. We talk about it in the sense of, trials and tribulations, happen to people, and you're in the middle of a war. And that's what I call, substance use disorders and mental health. I think there's no other disease like it, guys. And, quite frankly, and personally, those of us that have had, pretty severe medical illnesses, listen, my condition is so rare, they don't have standard treatment. And so a lot of they treated it a lot like late stage cancer. And I don't know if any of you guys have had chemotherapy before, but I spent a significant amount of time at Duke. I'm a Tar Heel, but I guess I'll go to Duke if I need chemotherapy to survive. I guess I'll bite the bullet. And so I was in Duke's chemotherapy unit for a number of weeks in a period of time when I was 20 years old. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever experienced a chemotherapy unit, but there's nothing sexy about it. I mean, it's just a bunch of recliner chairs with people lined up, just getting infused for hours and hours and hours. And so you sit there for 4 to 6 to 8 hours getting this infusion, and you're on a schedule. And most of the time that you're on a schedule with the same people with the same routine, and you sit there for 6 to 8 hours. And so you get to know them and get to know their families. And Duke can often be that late stage cancer. And so I was in there with people with late stage in their days, if not weeks, often on this planet. And I can tell you at 20 years old, getting to experience that was quite profound, because I can tell you that most of the people that I met, them and their families, were the most spiritually fit. Acceptance, had gone through a process, and were actually some of the happiest people that I'd ever met by the time that I met them. And I can tell you this disease is not like that. Cancer and a medical condition can take everything physical from you, can take your physical abilities, can take your life, but it can't take your soul. It can't take who you are. It can't just reach inside you and just change everything about you. This disease can. This disease can, and there's no other disease like it. And so this disease is one of the most maniacal and complex diseases that I've been around and in our healthcare system. And so when I say that there's a war here, that's not an overstatement. In fact, I think one of the biggest problems that our profession has, and we talk about it internally as a staff, is people do not treat this disease with the reverence of how deadly it is. You get hundreds of thousands of people that die from this disease every day. And so this is serious. And so think about that when we're talking about the treatment that's necessary. And when we make recommendations, And if you have initial resistance, or what we call initial trauma response, ask yourself, would you do that if it was chemotherapy? Would you do that if it was radiation? Because that's how deadly this disease is. We wouldn't be talking about jobs or diplomas or following the professional direction if we all treated this like a disease. And because you're at that, sort of fork in the road. And one of the questions that was asked earlier about you is about that willpower. This is the part of willpower. This is the part that you do have control over, that you do have influence over and impact over, is what you do from here. What you do from here. Are you going to completely deny the overwhelming evidence to the contrary of this being a disease and brains aren't working and they're nobody's fault? The people in this room don't have the self-awareness to make the decisions by themselves. Are you going to just take your will back and decide it anyway? Or are you going to have the willpower to have that acceptance that you need to follow the professionals' advice? It's that fork in the road that we talked about, that we all know people that will lean toward this way and constantly blame and constantly excuse and take no ownership. And if we're in a healthy spot, those are the people that we repel from. If we're in an unhealthy spot, those are the people that we'll surround ourselves to validate us not following what we know we need to do. And so we're all at a fork in the road right now. And one of the things that we really want to shy away from is this sense of blame, that it's somebody else's fault, that it's somebody else's job. Other people need to do. All that pertains. How many of you guys, sat there and all the material you found helpful for everybody else but you? And so there's some people in this room that's what happened. Or there's some people in the room that's their first thought and they were able to work through it. I can tell you that happened to me many a times. Very much I heard it for everybody else. And it took me some resetting to really say, okay, what do I identify with? And so one of the important parts about application of tools that it's important also to understand, we do not have the cure. I'm not about to remotely insinuate that. We can put down all the evidence-based principles and all the 2-year process, and you can follow it to a T. And we can get you 90% there. But that 10%, that most important part, is a part that you can't comply your way to, that we can't empower you. We have no control over. And that's that part of emotional honesty, or that's that part of spirituality, that this is a medical disease with a spiritual malady. It's that emotional honesty that's so key. And what I mean by that, and it's the difference between cash register honesty and how essential this understanding is in putting down the tools leaving here, is the difference between cash register honesty and emotional honesty is, if I walk over next door to the gas station and buy a Coca-Cola and put $5 on the table, and I take my Coke and walk out with the change, and as I drive away, I noticed that the teller gave me a $20 bill in my change. And I turned back around and walked back in the store and give her money back and say, ma'am, you gave me too much money. And I walk out feeling like the most honest saint in the world as I drive to my mistress's house. And so one is about very standard administrative honesty. One is about living authentically and living honestly, and being honest about what your true motivations are, and being truly authentic and honest about what's really going on inside. And that's emotional honesty. That's that spiritual part of it. And I can't make somebody get emotionally honest. I can't. When you're at that fork in the road, people ask, what's the difference between those that choose this way and those that choose this way? And I can't make somebody get emotionally honest. I've pondered that question all the time. Like, what was it about it that allowed me to say, when I finally got into Betty Ford, to say, after 7 treatment centers of me trying to dictate things, said, I'll do whatever you take, do whatever you say. And I was in there 120 days, and they said, you need to stay here longer. I said, okay. You just stay here for sober living for a year. I said, okay. Didn't want to do a damn thing of it. But what was it that allowed me to make the decision to lean into it? And so what I can tell you is that the healthier my vertical relationships are, the better my horizontal relationships are. And so when we start talking about application of these tools, it's real essential to understand that it starts with an internal job. And what I mean by that, and there is a wonderful book that talks about this, when you start talking about communication and behaviors and putting these things down, because make no mistake, when you start putting down these tools and you start applying some of this stuff, the most important thing to talk about is communication, because you can have the number one 100% accurate, healthiest boundary or healthiest tool in mind and identified, and absolutely lose it in the medium you communicate it. And so understanding communication tools and how you communicate is essential. And so what I can tell you is there is a wonderful book called Anatomy of Peace, Resolving the Heart of Conflict. It's actually I think one of the more impactful books in my life. It was given to me by a 5-star general that I intervened on his family and his son because his son needed help. And he gave this book to all his officers. And it's really about how do you navigate intense crisis, intense trauma situations very compassionately and very peacefully. And it's called Anatomy of Peace, Resolving the Heart of Conflict. And it actually has, the book has nothing to do with substance abuse, but the first part of the book starts out Parents at a Family Program. And it's quite a powerful book. And the basis and the root of that book is based in this idea that our life, our emotions and our mental state exist on this continuum called heart of war and heart of peace. And if you were to think of a line right here, and over there is sort of heart of war, and over here is heart of peace, and we start talking about boundaries and actions are an internal job, where are you on this continuum? And let me tell you, if you are in the first 9 months of this family process, you are over here in heart of war. You know, that's the reality of dealing with the intensity of this crisis day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out for so long. Is the very essence of crisis and trauma is that you are in this heart of war continuum. That's where you teach your brain to live in a chronically threatened environment. That's why that chronic stress, that's why I compared it to having a loved one deployed to war. When my mother called my house every morning at 6:30 a.m., your life exists in that heart of war. And so if I were to ask you, what do you think behavior, emotions, and decisions would be characterized by in that space? Heart of war. Like, what do you think decisions are characterized? How would you describe decisions in that space? Healthier. Come on, guys, let's go. Participate. Healthy or unhealthy? How would you describe it? Risky, chaotic, survival, reacting instead of responding, you know, fear, intense. Probably that's when we throw zingers out, usually behavior that we have to apologize for. And so let me ask you even a significant part of communicating. How well do you listen in that space? Not at all. Not at all. And even when we do, are we listening to understand or are we listening to respond? We're listening to throw back at them. And so let me ask you that. So regardless of what you've learned and you can identify the appropriate boundary, how well do you think you're able to communicate it in that space? Not well at all. And so when you think about this, it's real important to understand when you're talking about the timing and communication and what you have to do to inch this way. What you have to do to inch this way. And you're doing it now. Make no mistake, you're doing it now. And some of you have been on the way for a while, but inching this way takes a lot longer. Like I said, you didn't get there in a day, a week, and a month, and you're not going to come back here. That doesn't mean you don't experience moments of happiness and peace. So this isn't a polarizing conversation. But in general, when sensitive subjects come up and intensive subjects come up and triggered subjects come up, that perception filter, that fight or flight kicks in, the frontal cortex isn't there to stop us, and we react. Unless there's some things or some tools there to and mechanisms to stop us. And so that being said, you can begin to understand why patience and grace is going to be vital for your family's survival in the next 90 days. Empathy, patience, and grace for each other, because nobody does this perfectly. You know, you can get all the tools in the world and nobody's going to communicate it perfectly. You know, in that workbook that we send out, there's actually a wonderful sheet called Intentional Dialogue that actually gives you a script that you can use to communicate. And one of the tools are when you, I feel. Like, how do you communicate your feelings? When you do this, I feel this way. And also what I tell family members and identified patients, like right now, accuracy doesn't matter that much. Meaning if you hear any member of your family or identified patient saying, I feel, what does that tell you? That's right. If they say, when you shot JFK, I was sad, your response is, I hear you. When you say, I hear you, that's not agreeing with it. It's just being heard. And say, whoo, I hear you. But when you hear somebody say, I feel, they're at least trying. That means that they're trying to put down healthy tools to become closer to you. Isn't that what's most important? And so getting it right out of the gate is very rarely happens. And so there are tools that we're going to use, that having grace, empathy, and patience for each other is key. And also, how would you describe heart of war? Empathetic, graceful, or patient? And so it's really tough. It's going to have to be intentional. I mean, intentional, to say that we're really going to have empathy and patience for each other. That we're all going to just sort of maybe come to the collective agreement that we're going to try to have uncomfortable conversations, compassionate, uncomfortable conversation, and also understand that we may mess up. And we're going to have grace for each other in that process. And so understanding this heart of war versus heart of peace is essential in beginning to apply tools in the very beginning, tonight. After an exhausting weekend, an emotional weekend, I said it's not the time to start breaking things out and talking. That's why I say it's, exhaustion makes cowards of us all. When we're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, we're over here in heart of war. And so what do you have to do? What do you have to do? Because it's nobody else's responsibility to inch this way, back into sort of heart of peace. Before you start talking about ADS disease, what to put down, this is essential to understand. And understanding how we communicate, especially during crisis. And the first part of it is gaining the self-awareness. That application, that change is created by sort of awareness, acceptance, and then application. Awareness, acceptance, and then application. And so gaining self-awareness right now, and it's difficult to do without a frontal cortex. And promise you, you may think you've heard it all about the disease concept. There's going to be family members on Thursday night that are going to say, but they don't want to go to treatment. And that freaks me out. I said, I know, don't you remember that they don't want? We're going to have to remind you the same thing over and over again. And there's family members that are going to ask, do you lecture this to the patients? And said, yes, we do, but they don't have a frontal cortex either. So we have to tell them over and over and over again. And so gaining that sort of awareness of what's happening, what you're capable of, and what your communication patterns are essential. Gaining that self-awareness in how you communicate. So what's the majority of the way that we communicate as human beings? Verbally or non-verbally? Non-verbally. And so understanding, how do you present? How do you engage? Are you a passive communicator? Are you an aggressive communicator? If I were to draw a line here and put aggressive communicator over there and passive communicator here, how do you naturally communicate? Say what? Who would acknowledge that they're sort of more the aggressive type versus the passive type? My oldest, ugliest knucklehead brother, his name is Tom, and he bench presses 400 pounds and has this deep, loud voice that's very aggressive, and he would not harm a butterfly. But he's also very big and imposing. Don't you think he has to be mindful of that? Saying I love you right now with my fist, walk into it. Do you feel safe? No, that my nonverbals don't match my verbals, right? And so you've got to pay attention to that. And if somebody's 250 pounds and bench presses 400, no matter if he cries at Care Bear cartoons, he still comes across as aggressive. And so where are you on this line? I know as an interventionist that even with trained in communication, I know that even if I spit butterflies and rainbows, that when it comes to oftentimes females that have been victim of trauma at the male hand, I do not need to be the tip of the spear as an interventionist. because I will always come across as an alpha and could possibly re-traumatize them, no matter what I say and how it comes across. And I'm aware of that. That's why I always take a female with me whenever I have to do that at no cost, because that's what's best with the client. Because I'm aware how it comes across, how the communication comes. So how do you come across, passive or aggressive? And where do you think aggressive is here and passive is here? Where do you think passive aggressive is? It is absolutely aggressive. There's nothing in the middle about it. Saying you're an asshole sarcastically or whispering is still aggressive. It is absolutely aggressive. There is nothing in the middle about it. But there is something in the middle, because that's what we're trying to achieve. That is the healthy spot, which is not passive aggressive. The middle part is assertive. Assertive communication. That means that's exactly what my brother did 9 months sober. I love you and I'm proud of you, and I still wouldn't trust you around my child. There's nothing judgmental about it, nothing aggressive about it, nothing venomous about it, just very compassionate, being clear and kind. Being clear and direct is kind. No venom. Being assertiveness is being clear and direct without venom. And he said, and when somebody says, you made me feel, it's like, can't make anybody feel anyway. Let me make that crystal clear. Nobody has the power to make you feel anyway. They can't. And if you get that thrown your way, it's okay to say, I'm not going to pick that up. So don't have the way. Doesn't mean that what you said wasn't unhealthy. That's not what I'm saying. I said, I have no control how you internalize something. You have no idea when you run into somebody what somebody's gone through. Like a week ago, if you would have talked to me, you would have no idea that that day that I had a sponsee that was 8 years sober that relapsed for 2 days and called me at 7:05 a.m. and I missed the call, and at 7:10 he threw himself off a building. And I don't think I'm powerful enough to stop that suicide, but I missed the call. And if you'd have talked to me that day, I probably wouldn't have been as patient with you. And you would have never known that, because that was what was going on with me. And so you never know what somebody goes through. You never know what somebody's going through. Like when I worked in a residential center, and clients would have 15 minutes and they'd scream and yell at their parents and their family or their spouse. And then the family would call me. He hadn't changed a bit. It's like they didn't realize that they're in process group. They processed being sexually abused for the first time in their life. And so you have no idea what somebody's going through. And you have no control over how they internalize it and what happens to them. Their perception filter. You have no idea. We experience the world as we are, not as they are. It's called the lens principle. We experience the world as we are, not as they are. Do you guys understand that? Meaning there's everybody in here experienced me saying the same thing, but you guys would describe this differently. You know, we experience the world as we are, not as they are. Yes, sir. So question, is assertive communication the most healthy form of communication? Under the context of this continuum, absolutely. Passive and aggressive, assertive is absolutely the healthy form of communication. Yes. And so under the context of this continuum, yep, absolutely. Great question. And so really understanding, beginning to gain awareness in how you communicate and how does that come across is essential. You know, especially when it comes to sort of nonverbals as well, and understanding those nonverbals, and especially when it comes to emotional intensity. And for those of us that like sort of number lines, I'm going to put this on a number line for us. Emotional intensity, if you were to put it on a number line, 1 being the least, 10 being the most, you know, what I call the range is 6 through 10 is what I call drunk on emotion. Drunk on emotion. You know, that's when you get so happy, so angry, so sad, so silly that you're just drunk on emotion. It can be all different forms of emotion. So sad, so angry, so happy. How do you think decisions are characterized drunk on emotion? Got so angry I saw red. Or just so uncontrollably sad. Just drunk on emotion. How do you think decisions are characterized? with that level of emotional intensity. Reactive, very similar to Heart of War, right? Very reactive singers. Like I said, I don't use all-inclusive words, but 99% of decisions made drunk on emotion are unhealthy decisions. Revolutions are fought drunk on emotion, but unless you want to fight a revolution, I wouldn't make decisions in this range. And so the important part, the example I want to give is a lot of people can identify that everybody in this room has been drunk on emotion with anger at one point in their life. And so we're going to use that as the example, but it can happen with any emotion. Like I got so angry, I saw red. As your emotions intensify, your neurotransmitters affect your body somatically, physically. It presents itself non-verbally. And so your body sends you warning signals. Make no mistake, don't let anybody ever tell you anger is not a healthy emotion. Anger is a very healthy emotion. It's your body's natural defense mechanism. It tells you something's wrong. What you do with that anger can be unhealthy. How you show up to that anger, how you discharge the anger can be very unhealthy. But the fact that you have it, I wonder if that Sonos is on the same signal. That's weird. The fact that you have it, you guys don't want two of me, do you? The fact that you have it isn't unhealthy. It's your body's natural defense mechanism. And so when you get so angry, you see red, your body sends you warning signals, right? What happens when you feel your body intensifying? And everybody's differently. What is it? Your hands start shaking, heartbeat start. It's different for everybody. It's unique to everybody. Some people, their face gets flushed, right? Some people's fists get clenched. And so, I mean, when you get angry and you're sitting here clenching your fist, how safe do you think anybody feels in that conversation? And so understand, and when we're drunk on emotion and your body's sending you these warning signs, you're escalating, and we will blow right through it. But I want to be heard. And we will blow right through it. And the truth of the matter is you've got to gain self-awareness of you're escalating. And then what? Is understand what to do. And the point of that, then the understanding of you got to get where you can identify as you're escalating and understand that there's a difference between healthy detachment and avoidance behavior. And this is the time for healthy detachment in walking away and detaching yourself from the situation. Avoidance behavior means that you walk away, sweep it under the rug, never address it, pretend like it's not there. Stonewallers. Those of us that are avoidance behaviors, when we start doing this, it's going to be our responsibility to help our family realize we're doing it differently this time. Yes, we've been avoiders before, but when we're detaching in a healthy way means that you're like, hey, I'm escalating right now. I'm intensifying. I need to step away. I know that this is important. Can we come back and talk about it in an hour or tomorrow? I'm not in a space to talk about this right now. And it's our responsibility to be the one to initiate it and come back around, because we've developed a pattern that they're not going to believe us because we've developed a pattern of avoidance behavior. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to detach in a healthy way. Healthy detachment means that you're escalating, you realize it's unhealthy, and you need to step away and detach. It's important. You need to come back to it and address it, but you must address it in a way when you're healthy. And so understanding also what is healthy versus not healthy, it's actually a very simple concept. And what I mean by that, and this will help you in any type of decision or interaction, even in business or with friends or with your family, is anytime you engage with somebody, establish your long-term goal. Like, what's my long-term goal with this person or this situation? What's my long-term goal? And the way to decide whether this short-term conversation or this short-term tool, the way to decide if it's healthy or unhealthy right now is ask yourself, does it get me closer to that long-term goal or further away? And so think about it. If you're escalated, does having this conversation right now with this person at this time get me closer to my goal or further away? And so that's why I said that in your families, I don't know each specific family situation, but I'm guessing it's to become closer, more connected, more intimate, and healthier as a family. And spouses, those of you that are working toward becoming closer and more connected, to become closer as a couple, as a partnership. And so in asking yourself, does having this short-term conversation right now, this way, at this time, get me closer to my goal or further away? And anytime you're in that range, it will get you further away. And so beginning to ask yourself that, really it's any sort of engagement. Does it get me closer to my long-term goal or further away? Is the way to act, the way to decide if something's healthy and functional versus unhealthy and not functional. And also it's important to realize, much like we've identified, just stepping away from the situation isn't going to de-escalate things. Because we can step away and go find an army to work ourselves up and escalate and get catastrophic thinking, to validate our BS and just to get us more fired up. We can do that. And so what is it our job what do we have to do? This is when we got to go back to beginning, like what healthy coping skills did we have before this disease? What hobbies did you have? What self-care practices did you have? Did you enjoy yoga? Did you enjoy going to the gym? Did you enjoy listening to music? What healthy self-care practices did you utilize? Meditation, massage. What did you do? You've got to adapt those again. There's a difference between selfless and selfish, self-care and selfish. This is self-care. Beginning to establish those. It's like, I realized that when I was 18 and I was sick again, where exercise and running and sports was my coping mechanism. I couldn't do that anymore. And so I told me, don't send me flowers in the hospital, spend $20 on a DVD. And I wasn't avoiding the situation, but for 2 hours I could stick a movie in and I could just escape the mortality level discussion that was in my face. And so movies are how I have healthy coping. I go to the movies by myself all the time. I don't need to take anybody with me. I'm not going to talk to you during the damn thing. I go all the time. So like COVID was difficult when movie theaters shut down. Netflix isn't the same thing as leaving your phone in the car and going in a dark, cold theater with popcorn just closed off. And so that was a healthy coping mechanism for me. What's yours? You're beginning to identify that. It's going to be essential in understanding this and inching back toward heart of peace, is understanding that sort of intensity is what happens. That sort of making decisions and that sort of intensity is very unhealthy and normally gets you further away from your long-term goal. And so that's why also when those of you that have developed the patterns, and oftentimes we've talked about there are some spaces about this family recovery that the identified patient is healthier than the family and vice versa. But the family dealing with some of their resentments and some of the things that they haven't had a chance to get a whole lot of help for, they may be quick to react. That's why I tell patients, if you react back, what's that going to tell them? Well, same old ward, hadn't changed a bit. But the moment you say, hey, I hear you, I know you're angry, I know this hurt you, I'm just grateful you're still here. Talking about dropping somebody in their, that's how you begin to apply these things where you can show your family that things have changed. Modeling the behavior that you wish you would have shown. That's how you get people. When you get people to bring down their walls, is bring down yours. That does not mean put up with disrespect and abuse. Let me be clear about that. It's not polarizing. When I say bring down your walls, it doesn't mean if somebody's abusive and venomous and disrespectful that you become passive and not hold boundaries. This isn't a polarizing conversation, but I'm talking about healthy vulnerability. Bring down your walls. And like, for instance, a couple of years ago, it was a couple of days after Christmas, and I was talking to a husband that was a couple months sober, and his wife was still active in her disease, and she was drunk on Christmas, and he hadn't talked to her in 3 days because he was waiting for her to apologize. I'm like, how's that working for you? So is that getting you closer to your goal or further away? So I'm not saying that she shouldn't be held accountable, but is the silent treatment waiting for her to apologize? Were you capable of that in the middle of your disease? And so what gets you closer to your long-term goal? Modeling the behavior that she would have shown you. Listen, when I started getting this family recovery process, we didn't walk around and say, you need to do that, you need to do that. I had an older father that was loving, but they didn't believe it when introduced to psychotherapy. And so I didn't tell them what they needed to do. And I went and did a bunch of individual work. I actually went to an individual intensive where I was 2 years sober and went away to a week-long individual immersion and came back a different person. Then all of a sudden, without saying, you need to do this or you need to do that, my brother called me and said, just saw I was healthier and happier and said, hey, I'm having trouble with my wife. What's that place you went to? Gave it to them and they went. And then they went and they got healthier. And then my middle brother called and said, hey, that place that Tom and Colleen went, what's the name of it? Can I go? Yep, here you go. There it is. Then my mother called. What's the name of that place? She went twice. Then after 5 years, my 75-year-old father called and said, what's the name of that place? And then he went. Not one time did I say, you need to do this. I just did it. And then they followed. And so modeling the behavior that you wish they would have shown. And so, granted, I wish that we'd have done that earlier. That was after the divorce. But now we're able to be around each other and be at weddings and be, as healthy and close and connected as possible because we did the work. And understanding that emotional intensity, understanding that you have blind spots, these are essential to understand before you even begin to talk about specific boundaries. We actually don't talk about specific boundaries in this workshop because what's a specific healthy boundary for one family may be an extremely unhealthy boundary for another family. And so it's like, for instance, like when I was young and getting sober and out of Betty Ford, most of the time, helping people become financially autonomous and not giving a tremendous amount of financial support is something that you're careful of with young adults. But when I got sober, I went into Betty Ford in a wheelchair, not because I was detoxing, because my spine didn't work. Because I woke up from a blackout and my legs didn't work. And I remember that I called my family and nobody came running that time. And that was sort of my bottom. And I had to convince my brother for them to kick down the door to come and get me. And even the Outer Banks Hospital, I had doctor shopped so many times in there, they let me sit on the gurney for 17 hours before they gave me an x-ray. That was the delayed consequence of my disease. But when I got through Betty Ford, they didn't think I could walk again. And I was with a cane, so I couldn't exactly work a job. And so my parents had to financially support me. The only difference is they didn't make that decision. It actually came through a third-party professional of how to give it to me. And they followed their direction. And so that would be a different boundary than if you said, hey, well, he gave a young adult money, we need to give the young adult this money. It's like, no, there's different context. And so we don't go into specific boundaries because even that was a boundary that a professional helps us navigate. And so the most important thing to understand about boundaries and applying things is what we're talking about right now, is understanding how you communicate and understanding where you are in this, sort of continuum and how important it is for you to understand it is your internal job to do what you have to do and to communicate. And that's a pride swallowing part of this, that you have to swallow your humility. And the most important part of this is also, just like I told that husband, forgiveness is not transactional. Forgiveness is not transactional. You don't have to, it's not about waiting until somebody does something. What if that person never does it? That's why they say that's like taking poison, waiting the other person to die. Forgiveness is about setting somebody free and realizing that person's you. So it's not transactional. It is not dependent on somebody else doing something. And so an understanding of, and also the understanding that when allowing somebody to change, if somebody's actually going through the change motions, allowing them to change. And are you in that space right now? Some of you might say, hey, I'm so angry and so hurt right now. I'm not in that space. And that's okay to say. That's appropriate to say. There's nothing venom about that. That's assertive communication. Just like my brother's like, I'm really hurt right now. I'm still really angry. I see what you're doing and I'm just not there right now. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing unhealthy. You're not doing anything to anybody. It's nothing. That's an assertive statement. I statements. When you're doing detachment, I statements. When I feel. And make sure you're describing a feeling. You can't say, when you did this, I feel you're an asshole. That's cheating. Cheating. Not effective. Gets you further away from your long-term goal. And so that understanding of using I statements is essential. And all of that, if you think about it, the more that you're in this heart of war, the more that you're in this emotional intensity, the less you'll be able to do that. The less you'll be able to be present and be compassionate. Because guys, let me tell you one thing that I have learned, whether it was at Duke or when I was at Young, or whether it was October where I spent 30 days in ICU and 17 blood transfusions to keep me alive. Relationships are the true currency in this world. And so learning how to piece together your relationship, whatever sort of resentment or anger, I understand that it may hurt. And if it's a relationship that you truly cherish, it's not worth it. So working through it, hopefully this will help. What my mentor who said, and I believe me, I realize humility has never come to me naturally, ever. The longer I stay sober and the more I do things, the more it comes. But the understanding of never miss an opportunity to get smaller is also a way that you can really, change things. Because when you power up, what is somebody else going to do? Power up. And let me be clear, that does not mean putting up with abuse and disrespect and that sort of stuff. That's not what I mean by never miss an opportunity to get smaller. These opportunities, really what this weekend provides you guys of how to get closer and more connected as a family, to have these conversations, to create the safe space that you need to create, not only to gain awareness, but for people to feel safe within your family, to be able to talk about these family roles or these family rules that you need to identify, keep, change, or remove. So you can spoke the unspoken, and you guys who don't voice your needs, listen, we can't read your mind. It is your responsibility to communicate your needs. That first starts with being worth it. And the one thing that I will leave you with as we conclude the communication part of it is the part about boundaries that's really essential to understand when we talk about boundaries. Healthy boundaries are not ultimatums. And so how dare you do this to me is not an excuse that I pick up with a healthy boundary. That's what you'll hear a lot of times. How dare you do this to me? It's like nobody's doing anything to you. You can do whatever you want to do. And if you want a relationship with me, this is how I deserve to be treated. Because who are boundaries really about? Boundaries are about 100% about you. They are not about the other person. It is not, if they do this, I'll set a healthy boundary. You set healthy boundaries. And somebody asked me, well, how long do we have to set boundaries? I say, I don't know. When is it appropriate not to set a healthy boundary? And understanding that when you set boundaries, it is about you and establish how you deserve to be treated, what your values are, what you demand your relationship to be like. And make no mistake, it's hard to ask other people to be respectful, kind, and graceful to your boundaries if you aren't respectful, kind, and graceful to yourself. And so the first part of when you understand that you're escalating and you need to detach is to realizing you're worth it and to set that boundary to detach. You don't need to sit there and take the intensity, take the abuse. It's your job to detach in a healthy way. That's an internal job, setting those boundaries. And make no mistake, like I said, it's if you set healthy boundaries and anybody gets upset, it's because they benefit when you don't have it. And so understand that. And also understand that, when it comes to families and especially adult children, they're entitled to your relationship. You will always be their mother. You will always be their father. You will always be their family member. They are not entitled to your resources. Say that again. They are entitled to your relationship. You will always love them. They will always be your child. That does not mean that they are entitled to your resources. They can't say, I want to be my own dad. Mommy and daddy pay for it. That's incongruent. And so an understanding of that's how the congruence works. Most of the time when I tell families, when you're setting healthy boundaries, your response is, listen, we'll do anything in our power to support, and our finances and support goes behind healthy recovery. And right now, that's behind this trusted professional. We'll support whatever they say. If they tell us you can leave early, if they can tell us you can do that, we'll do it. If they tell us you need to extend and they tell us we're going to support that. But our energy and all of our efforts go behind family recovery. So how dare you do this to me? It's like, we're not doing anything to you. We want you to come with us. We want you to hop on this bus. You can choose not to, and I get it. And all of our resources, go behind this. Because that's the duty of a parent, a family member, right? Is to make the ultimate sacrifice for somebody's well-being. Not to make them happy, but somebody's well-being. And so you would never contribute to their demise. And so if I needed to go get chemotherapy, my parents wouldn't support me, going to the Himalayas and drinking, water off a Sherpa's back because I heard that was what would cure my disease. They wouldn't pay for that. It's just some bogus, process. that support the evidence-based process. Do anything to the contrary is unhealthy. And so I strongly recommend, especially in the beginning, when you don't know, say, listen, we will absolutely throw our support behind the family recovery. Anything with disease oriented, we're not supporting. 100% toward family recovery. And right now, that's decided by the trusted professional. Whatever they say, we'll do and we'll support. And also the last thing is they are not ultimatums. How dare you do this to me is not something you need to pick up. If you set a healthy boundary. And that goes both sides, because both sides hold each other emotionally hostage. Both sides. And so just be mindful of that. That's just out of fear, and that's not going to stop just because you guys can acknowledge that's happening and it's unhealthy. Doesn't mean it's going to stop like that. And so just be mindful of it. And so when it comes to understanding this communication spot, blind spots, any of this, implementing these tools and how important that is leaving here today, does anybody have any questions? Erica, got 5 minutes and straight to the last process group that you were in for us to finish up. After the process group, we'll actually come back here for a couple of minutes, not anything extended. So I got to communicate one thing before you go, and we'll be out of here before 5.
Hey everybody, so we're going to take just a quick break, just a few minutes, and then we are going to do the same kind of thing as we did last time. Going to play a song, and then I am going to send you all into your process groups. It'll be the same ones you were in before. So just again, let me know if you have questions or if you're having trouble getting into the process group. You can either just unmute and talk directly to me or message me in the chat. We will start the song in about 3 minutes.